very much, Alana. I'm going to give you a high-level explanation of some of the different kinds of laws that the U.S. government has created in order to, specifically talks to Alana's example before. It's the anti-kickback statute. Now, this is not specific to healthcare. This is for all government contractors. It's anyone who knowingly and willfully offers, pays, solicits, or receives any remuneration to induce or in return for referrals or businesses for which, and then they've added some information about healthcare, for which any federal healthcare program may pay in part or whole is committing a felony. And these are punishable by fines as well as time in prison. We also have something called the Stark Anti-Referral Statute, and this, again, gets back to Alana's laboratory example. This prohibits physicians to have direct or indirect financial interest in an entity and making referrals to that entity. So if a physician is a co-owner of a diagnostic service, like a laboratory or an X-ray operation, they would not be able to make direct referrals to that particular entity because there would have been a financial benefit to that particular physician. And there are exemptions that can be made under our federal program, but for the most part, these things would be considered illegal and able to be prosecuted under our laws. False Claims Act. This prohibits people from presenting or causing to be presented to the federal government a false or fraudulent claim for payment or approval. And this can be any type of contract. This can be defense, this can be healthcare, this can be our aeronautic space system. Any type of false claim falls underneath this. And then the second part is making, using, or causing to be made or used a false record or statement to get a false or fraudulent claim paid or approved by the federal government. Now, the False Claims Act violations, it's per claim. So you can imagine in a healthcare environment, so if you have a physician that submitted 100 claims a day and they were false, per claim he could be charged $5,000 to $10,000 per claim that are false. So in the medical arena, this is a very effective law because the financial penalties are huge. Plus, they can be charged what they call treble damages, or 3 times the damages to the federal government. The standard of proof is a preponderance of the evidence. An interesting thing about the False Claims Act, and we've seen, and perhaps you have seen too in our news, some of these massive fraud cases where it's a pharmaceutical company and it's $80 billion that are being returned back to the federal government. Most of these are what you call qui tam cases, or whistleblower actions. This is when an individual who works inside of a company can sue that company on behalf of the federal government. So someone will work as a whistleblower, or sort of like an undercover agent for the government inside an organization. So if I'm a hospital employee and I see, and perhaps I'm an accountant, and I see that my hospital is billing Medicare fraudulently, and Medicare is our large government program. They're billing fraudulent claims to the government, and it's a pattern that they continue to do. I can report that crime to the government, and the government will say, well, can you stay in there, be quiet, and gather some more evidence for us? And if you work the case with the government and then you become a qui tam realtor, you can recover 15 to 25% of the government's recoveries. So we've had some people who have made millions and millions of dollars, and Alana can actually speak to this. Alana, do you want to talk about it?
Sure. There have been individuals who have worked in hospitals or in laboratories, and they become aware that there's some fraud taking place. And they go to their boss and they say, I don't like this, this is wrong, this is immoral.
Oops, okay. I can carry on until we get her back.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So the whistleblower is very unique way of uncovering fraud from within the organization, and then these people are compensated for that recovery. We also have a criminal False Claims Act. The False Claims Act I described before is more for civil, and this is criminal, and it's also then this is a felony, which is convicted in time in prison other than just fines for presenting a claim to the federal government and knowing that claim is false. Now, up to the point, the previous laws, for the most part, only apply to the federal government programs. They do not apply to the private insurers. So what fraudsters were finding out was, well, we could be punished for submitting a false claim to the government. We can't be punished under the law for submitting claims to private insurers. There were not the same types of protections for the private insurers. So in our HIPAA law, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, they expanded the False Claims Act out to private insurers. And it acts as embezzling, stealing, any type of fraud that you might be able to commit against the federal government. It expands that out to the private insurers as well. And these are some examples. The biggest thing that the HIPAA law did for healthcare fraud was increase the penalties. So the penalties included fines and imprisonment up to 10 years, which is more than anything else before. And if serious bodily injury occurs, then imprisonment for not more than 20 years. And then if death occurs, they can actually receive imprisonment for life. There are a couple other easy types of ways that we prosecute healthcare fraud, and one is mail fraud. Anytime you use the mail to defraud the government, that's considered a type of fraud to use the U.S. Postal Service. So previously, people would mail their claims back and forth, and the insurer would mail the check, or the government would mail the check back to the physician. And anytime that mailing occurs, as part of a fraudulent scheme, that could be mail fraud. The burden of proof is very easy for this. So this is typically a charge that you'll see tacked on to the number of other charges in a healthcare fraud case. There's also wire fraud, which now, being that all of our transactions are electronic, applies a little more accurately to the environment now. Criminal false statements, and then money laundering, which would be something that you would see in our organized crime elements. And these are all different types of non-healthcare laws that can be applied to a healthcare case. So it gives some teeth for the government. It allows us to punish people and to make examples of people who commit this large-scale fraud. We also have, within the federal government, an exclusions list. These are people who have committed crimes and have submitted false claims against the government. And what the government does is it excludes them from billing the government ever again. So if you are a physician and you have submitted false claims to the government and the government catches you, you may never bill the government again. It can damage your livelihood as a physician. You might, or a hospital, even worse, a hospital who probably gets 50 to 70% of their money from federal government programs, is now excluded from billing. It essentially puts that person out of service and wipes them from their livelihood. Payment suspensions. Prior to our most recent healthcare law, the Affordability and Accountability Act, the U.S. government could not suspend payments for medical services. But now they can if they have what they call a creditable allegation of fraud, which just means something like a hotline tip or a member complaint or an open investigation. So if the government suspects you of billing a fraudulent claim, they don't have to pay it now. Prior to this past law, just in the past 2 years, they had to pay those claims. And then they could go back and chase the money later. I don't know, we must have lost her. Okay, well, I can carry on. A private insurer can place a provider on what we call prepayment review. So if we see a pattern of claims and they look suspicious, what we can do is rather than just pay the claims as they come through our claim system, we can put them on review. So someone is actually taking a look at the claims and decide, is there a possibility of fraud here? And if so, then they'll investigate those claims. And there are financial penalties, unfortunately, for insurers. I talked about the prompt pay laws if we don't pay the claims very quickly. So it is more difficult for us to stop payment. We have in the U.S. government a very convoluted system that has both federal rights and then state rights. So part of our states, and we have 50 individual states, each state has the right to license physicians to practice in that state. So this is another way of sanctioning physicians who commit fraud. They can have their license removed in that state. They have to meet certain requirements, and that licensure can be suspended or terminated in cases of fraud.